AMD, if you are considering anywhere near $450 for an 8GB graphics card in the middle of 2025, please reconsider. Now, this price could very well be a placeholder, but earlier today on Amazon, there were listed a RX 9060 XT, it's the XFX Swift, that is hard to say, model, which is, by the way, not a top-of-the-line cooler. So if this, let's say they knew the MSRP and then were pricing a little bit above, this is not one of the top-of-the-line cooler models. So again, no reason to believe this would be the MSRP, even if this isn't a placeholder. But at the same time, this isn't a top-of-the-line cooler or anything like that. $450, and again, they even had the pre-order button to click here. Now, if you click the link now, it's dead. But this was listed along with the 16GB version listed at $520. By the way, they also had a release date of June 5th, which is in line with rumors. AMD is expected to be announcing at Computex, and that would be later this month, and then again rumored to then actually have the release date to the public in June. None of that is official at this point. Anyway, again, could be placeholder pricing, but if AMD is considering $450 for an 8GB graphics card in 2025, they are making a huge mistake. More on that in a second, but I want you to not make a huge mistake. So many of you are making a huge mistake when upgrading your PC gaming setup, not thinking enough about the chair you will be sitting in the whole time. Frankly, what some of you are doing is a bit embarrassing. What you need is a high-quality ergonomic office chair like the FlexiSpot C7M that FlexiSpot recently sent me, and a huge thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this part of today's video. Your back will thank you so much for upgrading to a FlexiSpot ergonomic office chair, and the C7M has all the features you need. A mesh back solves those sweaty long gaming sessions, and adjustable height armrests solves the annoying problem where you get a chair that can't actually sit flush with your desk or reach an appropriate height for reaching your mouse and keyboard comfortably. The FlexiSpot C7M armrests have a truly impressive range of motion, allowing them to rotate forward, backward, inside, and outside to get into perfect position. There's also an adjustable height back, adaptive lumbar support, which your back will thank you for, and an adjustable headrest. The seat itself can move forward and backward, and there is even a footrest perfect for when you want to recline for some controller-based gaming, or maybe even take a nap. Check out the sponsored link in the video description or pinned comment to upgrade to a FlexiSpot ergonomic office chair today. Your back will thank you. Now, do we have any other evidence or listing that AMD may be targeting way too high of a price point for their 8GB 9060 XT? Also, by the way, I don't like that it seems to be the case that both the 8 and 16GB versions are called XT, rather than like last generation where you had the XT on the 7600 XT version with 16GB and the non-XT version was an 8GB card. So it wasn't as just misleading to consumers who aren't checking the VRAM capacity as closely. This is one of the big pushbacks that a lot of reviewers have. I know Hardware Unboxed spoke out about this. I've spoken out about this with the 5060 Ti models, where you have the 8 and the 16, and they're both called a 5060 Ti, where a consumer or a pre-built system, you might see a pre-built system with a 5060 Ti in it. It might not be clear whether it's the 8 or 16GB model, or a customer may go out to buy a 5060 Ti because somebody recommended it to them, and they may not know to check that VRAM capacity. And yes, some amount of that is on the consumer, but considering that will be a vastly different gaming experience on these two cards, that calling them both the 9060 XT, I think is more misleading to the consumer than, like I said, what AMD did last generation, where only the 16GB model got the XT branding. There was also some clock speed differences, but they were otherwise hardware similar, stuff besides the clamshelled VRAM to get up to 16 on the XT version. Anyway, so that's an issue, but like I said, is there any other price listings or anything? Well, Momomo on X did post this screenshot. Now, this screenshot appears to be from a Swiss retailer, and if you look at it, it is quoting CHF here, which I believe is Swiss francs. Now, I'm not super familiar with Swiss francs, but let's look at these listings in context. These are the Acer Nitros, And it's showing an 8 gigabyte version of the 9060 XT at 508.30 for Swiss francs, I think here, and the 16 gigabyte version at 556.70. Now, to put that into some context, one thing you could look at is the pricing for the 9070 and 9070 XT versions, which are also listed with Acer Nitro models at the same retailer at 695, so basically 700 and 776 respectively on those. They also have some Acer Predator Bifrost versions at 770 and 850. So anyway, the point is, it clearly looks like a step down in pricing compared to the retail pricing of the 9070s, but still seems pretty high, at least if I can trust my Swiss franc to dollar conversions. Because this would have the $508 for Swiss francs on the 8 gigabyte card convert to over $600 in the United States. Now, I also wanted to adjust for like VAT rates. Now, when I looked up the VAT rate for Switzerland, it's looking like 8.1%. That seems low to me, but maybe that is how, because I thought most European countries were 20%, but this is what I'm seeing for them. Now, if you divide out the 8.1% out of the price, that would show the dollar amount, the dollar amount conversion, and also with the VAT taken out at like 565. Now, again, this could be placeholder pricing, and this could be placeholder pricing. So now maybe we need to talk about, so what would it take for AMD not to screw this up when they announce the pricing here? Because honestly, I think AMD might still be deciding what the price will be, because it very much was the case with the 9070 and 9070 XT that AMD was deciding on the price for the MSRP on those cards up to the very last second before their announcement. Now, they never asked my personal opinion on what they should price it on. However, multiple bigger reviewers like Hardware Unboxed and Gamers Nexus put out videos where they specifically mentioned that AMD was actually asking them their opinion and getting feedback on pricing for those cards, which is kind of crazy. And then when you watched the actual announcement at, what was the January trade show? I think it was CES when they announced it. When you listened to any time where they mentioned the price of the card, it was clearly an audio edit that was done last minute. So they had the whole presentation ready to go and then clearly edited in the pricing at the very last second. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that AMD is currently actually trying to figure out how to price these. The problem is, I think the 8 gigabyte card is fundamentally flawed. The 16 gigabyte card, I think its pricing, now 520 seems high to me, especially when the 9070 non-XT MSRP is meant to be 550. However, if you look at the actual market, the 9070 non-XT isn't selling, at least in the United States, anywhere even remotely close to its MSRP. They're coming, the lowest models that pop into stock but are out of stock right now seem to be $650, which is $100 over their MSRP. And more frequently, they're in stock at closer to $700. So if we're talking real world pricing rather than MSRP, then, 520 is a lot lower than the 650 to 700 that we're actually seeing 9070s listed. And again, this is, even if this isn't a placeholder price, if this was, the XFX Swift price, that doesn't have to obey any sort of MSRP, right? So there is that. So this feels way too high compared to MSRP, but compared to real market pricing of 9070s, well, this has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, so it's not a fundamentally flawed product. The question then is just, how much performance does it have? And we don't know that yet. We do know that the 9060 XT GPU die seems to be basically like half of what you get on a 9070, well, 9070 XT on the full die version. But do note that the boost clocks are pretty high on these things. Oftentimes a smaller die can boost higher. You still get the 16 gigabytes of VRAM. We're gonna have to see how the actual performance plays out. The other thing about it is gonna be, what is it competing against? The 9070 is a little faster than a 5070, so I would expect a 9060 XT to be slower than a 5070, because the 9070 non-XT isn't that much faster than a 5070. It is faster, but not wildly faster than a 5070. So if the 9060 XT is competing more with a 5060 Ti, which by naming scheme, it certainly seems to be, right? 5060 Ti, 9060 XT, AMD seems to be intentionally trying to match NVIDIA naming schemes with their competitor cards, that kind of thing. And again, with that 8 and 16 gigabyte split, and the 5060 Ti is doing the same thing, well, the 16 gigabyte version of the 5060 Ti, at least in the United States, seems to actually be on sale for a little under $500. We're talking $480 if it's actually in stock anywhere. The MSRP of $430, I think it was, has just been non-existent in any meaningful capacity ever since launch day, at least based on when I've been checking. So the 16 gigabyte card, I mean, if it was noticeably faster than a 5060 Ti, and there's a big gap between the 5060 Ti and the 5070, so, this could maybe slot in between those. Maybe AMD is feeling like, let's say maybe their MSRP was like $499 and then this partner model is marked up 20 bucks. Like, speculate on that. I mean, in the real market, maybe that would do all right. In previous generations, though, AMD has had to significantly undercut their NVIDIA counterparts. Now, interestingly, though, at least in the US, it hasn't seemed that way for the 9070 series. Now, it's difficult to say exactly why that's changing. I think it's a combination of factors. One thing is that the 5070 is only 12 gigabytes, and people, I think, are starting to wise up more to the value of VRAM capacity, especially as a card ages. So I think some people like the fact that the 9070 is giving them 16 gigabytes of VRAM versus the NVIDIA competitor at 12. I also think some people are just fed up with the 50 series. It's not getting a lot of good publicity. It's had a lot of driver issues, especially compared to what NVIDIA is known for, with a lot more driver stability. They had missing ROPS, which is definitely a bad look and bad look for the quality assurance. They didn't have a lot of supply available on launch, although 5070 has been now more readily available, somewhat closer to MSRP. Still over, it's supposed to be $550. It's a little over $600 here. And then also, I think I'm missing some things here too. I mean, the lower tier cards haven't had the melting cable issues to my knowledge, but they once again, at least on the 600 watt 5090, were going with that same connector. I mean, it had some revisions to it, but still saw melting. The point is, there's been a lot of negativity around the 50 series, also with the marketing, trying to say a 5070 is 4090 performance when it clearly isn't. So I think all of that has given AMD a bit of a marketing win, especially when combined with the fact that the biggest drawback for going AMD versus NVIDIA in a lot of real-world gaming situations was the FSR being a lot worse than DLSS. And FSR 4 has been a significant step towards catching up to DLSS. It's in many ways surpassed DLSS 3 and is just a little bit under DLSS 4. The main place it really needs to pick things up is in game support. Although I will say that I think we did just get a bunch of games added with FSR 4 support. Looks like 8 new games in the latest driver update. So they are trying to move that way. Looks like we got Ghost of Tsushima, Frostpunk 2, Everspace 2, Fort Solis, Warhammer 40k Darktide, The Finals, Influx Redux. So that's all good stuff. It still puts FSR 4 support pretty far behind DLSS 4 support, but again, the actual quality of the upscaler is a lot better. You can mod it in with Optiscaler, things like that. So I guess what I'm saying is, at least with the 9070 series cards, based on at what point they're actually selling out in the United States, they have been able to seemingly sell out at prices more closely matched to their NVIDIA counterparts than I've seen with any previous AMD generation. So perhaps pricing the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte version close to the 16 gigabyte 5060 Ti version might not be as big of a disaster on the market for AMD as it would have been with previous generations. But we still have to see. NVIDIA is still the name brand with the biggest market share and mind share. So I don't know. We'll have to see how that would play out if they're targeting somewhere around $500 for the 16 gigabyte version. But again, we have to see its performance. And it's not a fundamentally flawed product. The problem with the 8 gigabyte version is, think about it from their perspective on their margins, right? So let's just pretend the 16 gigabyte version is going to be somewhere around $500. Well, if that was the case, then how much money do you save on the 8 gigabyte version? You literally only are saving the cost of the extra 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I mean, it's the same GPU die. I mean, I guess you're not having to clamshell the memory, so there's probably a little other savings on the PCB and things like that. A tiny bit more wattage on the card for the extra VRAM, but not a lot. Like, this is, like, from the manufacturer's cost perspective, the 8 gigabyte version doesn't save them all that much money. But the problem is it becomes fundamentally flawed. This is the same issue we have with the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte versus 16 gigabyte version. It doesn't, from a manufacturing perspective, seem like it saves them all that much margin, so they can't price it as low as it really needs to be to make sense as an 8 gigabyte card. Quite frankly, yes, you can make 8 gigabyte cards work in 2025. The problem is they're a hassle to make work. You oftentimes have weird stuttering and missing textures that most users are not going to be aware is being caused by the lack of VRAM, because that's not clearly communicated to you while you're playing a game. And this is not going to get better, this is going to get worse, because especially as we move into the next console generation, and a lot of people will be holding on to their cards for 5 years plus, we would expect the next gen of consoles in that, and that means that overall baseline graphics targets for games and VRAM capacity usage targets and everything goes up. It's not a good place to be when you're buying a brand new, very expensive, if we're talking anywhere near $450 graphics card in 2025. Yeah, if you're on something like a 3070 that you bought 5 years ago, yes, you can make it work. Play games at medium settings, turn down textures, you can get by on it. But you shouldn't jump into that brand new on an expensive graphics card in the middle of 2025. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So my problem with this is I can't see really heavily recommending an 8 gigabyte graphics card that costs over $300. I mean, I'm talking like these should be $200 to $250 budget cards with an 8 gigabyte VRAM capacity. Anything beyond that, it just feels like you're spending way too much money to be already encountering severe issues on an 8 gigabyte card. And honestly, the more powerful a 9060 XT actually is, the worse 8 gigabyte feels, because you're powerful enough to run heavy settings, but the VRAM capacity is holding you back. And how much money did you save? It just doesn't make sense. So anyway, there were some rumors that the 8 gigabyte version would be canceled, but I don't think those rumors are true. I think it's going to exist, and honestly, I just don't think it makes sense at any price where they can maintain their margins if the 16 gigabyte version is what their kind of baseline is. So I think this is unfortunately just a fundamentally flawed product. And same thing with the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte version. Whether the 16 gigabyte version is overpriced, that completely depends on its performance. And we have yet to see that. What do you guys think about all this? Let me know in the comments section, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.